A very common question we get is what width of belt is right for me, whether it's 2.5 inch, 3 inch, or 4 inch. A lot of people think that the wider belt means more contact area, more support, therefore, wider must be better. While that might be true in theory, there's more to it than that, and that's what we're going to cover in this video. Let me start with saying the standard in most cases for most people is the 3 inch belt. This is by far the most appropriate belt for most people. The 2.5 inch, the 4 inch, those are special cases generally, and we will discuss why that is. The essential thing that determines which width belt is appropriate for you. It comes down to this right here. How much room do you have between the top of your hips and the bottom of your ribs? This is the area where the belt is going to have to sit, okay? And it's going to have to occupy that space without impinging on either one of these, even though you're moving around, depending on what the lift is. Two lifts in particular that this can be a problem on. Number one is the squat. If you have a belt that's too wide, if a 4 inch is too wide for you, and you are squatting down, and as you squat down, the top of your rib cage presses into the top of this belt. This is where you hear about people doing something called like bruising a rib or something like that. Very painful. I've done it before. That's why a 4 inch belt can be problematic for a lot of people on the squat. The second is the deadlift, where we have to be able to bend completely over, set the back in extension with the belt already on, with no load assisting us in doing that like we have in the squat. And that's the reason that deadlift setup, being able to get set up on a bar that's sitting on the floor, is why I still use a 3 inch on deadlifts and use a 4 inch for everything else. Most lifters that come to me with this question want this broken down by height. So I will give you what my recommendation is by height and then tell you why we might violate that completely. In any case, if you're in the range of 5'4" to 6 foot, a 3 inch almost always is the right answer. If you're below 5'4", a 2.5 inch starts to become the more common option. If you're 6 feet and above, that's where the 4 inch normally comes in. Now, having given that height breakdown, it's important to note that this distance we talked about, this critical distance between your hips and your ribs, it is highly correlated with height. It is not directly determined by height. There are different body shapes and types. The technical term is anthropometry, just meaning body geometry. You can be a certain height and have long legs, short torso. You can be the opposite. And so it's not hard to find someone who is an example that breaks the rule. But again, most people want this broken down by height. And so I have to give general advice and then describe why we might have to break that advice. The first area where the advice of belt width versus height might break down is how much body mass you have. Let's say your body mass is above average. Well, then we don't have the same concern with impinging on the hips or the ribs because we have mass that prevents the belt from contacting either one of those. So the more body mass that you have, the more you can probably tolerate a thicker belt versus a thinner one. The next place that the advice might break down depends on your age. Um, I'm middle-aged now, so 50 is no longer sounding as old as it once did. But if you are older, say in the neighborhood of 50, and you're coming into weightlifting for the first time or maybe after a long layoff, your tolerance for being able to handle a wider belt is going to be much, much less. And we see a lot of older lifters, especially 50 plus, that otherwise might tolerate a wider belt, actually prefer a 2.5 inch, and that works really well for them. So age is very much something that we would take into consideration when considering the standard advice of belt width based on height. The next thing is, how new are you to using a weightlifting belt? Not necessarily how new you are to lifting. You could have been lifting for a while. And if you're just now saying that I would like to try a weightlifting belt, which belt should I use? The 3 inch is almost always going to be the recommendation. As a corollary to what I said before about having large body mass, if you have lower body mass, if you're very lean, that is going to push you towards the thinner belts because we have less and less tolerance between the hips and the ribs because we don't have this extra mass to cushion either one of them. So the leaner you are, the more likely you are to come down in width. To try to wrap this up as neatly as possible, we're going to have to make some simplifying assumptions and say that because we know the distance we're concerned about is highly correlated to height, we're going to recommend belts based on height. If you're below 5'4", a 2.5 inch is probably correct. If you are between 5'4" and 6 feet, a 3 inch is probably correct. If you're above 6 feet, a 4 inch is probably correct. And this is all subject to the caveats we've mentioned earlier that may skew you in one direction versus the other. Let's talk about one objection I hear when I recommend a 3 inch or something narrower for someone. They might say, hey, all the weightlifting belt videos that I see, all the lifting videos that I see, it's someone wearing a big 4 inch belt. And again, what I'm saying is that the 3 inch is best for the average person. When you're looking at competitive lifters, by definition, they are not average. That is why they're not using the average belt. Most of us are average. We might need something different than the people that you see in the videos. So that's why you might see an overrepresentation of 4 inch belts in weightlifting videos, when in fact, most people that want to lift actually need a 3 inch or even something thinner than that. So that's the main objection that I hear. One additional thing I'll tell you, and this is surprising to a lot of people, is that a 4 inch belt is the least common recommendation that I will make. Why is that? Let's say, who would I recommend a 4 inch belt for? Let's say you've got a high school kid who's on the football team. He's 6'1", he's 235, he's already very big and strong, and now he's in the weight room 4 days a week to support his football training. Could he use a 4 inch belt right off the bat? Yeah, he probably could. And that would probably be the recommendation in that instance, even though he's never used a belt before. The further you get away from that, the older you get, the more lean you get, the less athletic you get, the more you will probably need to go down in width. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just choosing the belt that is right for you. I hope this video has been helpful. If it has, please like and subscribe. That helps us a lot. If you want to check out any of our belts, DominionStrengthTraining.com. You can always send us questions to team@DominionStrength. That's our email. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.